Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ramin Talesh. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Life and Leadership and Dean of Students here at UCI. And I want to welcome you to the What Matters to Me and Why series that we produce every month here on the campus. I'm going to be sharing that we do have an audience at home. So we have a Zoom audience. You won't maybe see them throughout because our presenter has a PowerPoint, but in the end, you will be able to see the gallery, and hopefully we'll be able to speak into the mic so that they can hear us very well as they listen in at their convenience of their laptop somewhere in who knows where. I do have some housekeeping announcements for the group here right now. First of all, the talk is being filmed. So if you, by entering the room, you've consented to being filmed. Now, if you don't want to appear on the video, we ask that you move to the back of the room. So probably people up here might get a little bit in the view of the camera from time to time. So that's an announcement there. Also, if you have a question, we're going to definitely have a quick question and answer time at the program. But please wait for us to bring the microphone to you so that the audience can hear the question. As well as I mentioned, this is being filmed, and we have a great archive of all of these talks on our website that you can catch up to or look in on if you're here for the first time, for instance, and want to see someone that has spoken in the past. So please wait for us, and we'll bring the microphone to you so you can ask your question. And then you should have, well, actually, maybe we're doing questionnaires differently now. We will probably be sending you electronically a questionnaire. And so with that questionnaire, we really are looking for feedback, and we use that feedback as a planning committee. I'm on the planning committee. I should have mentioned that probably at the beginning, the organizing committee, along with a few others that are out in the audience. And so we will use that material and information to helpfully improve the program and also look out for new speakers and things like that. So please take the time. It's important to us for you to do that. And those of you that are here and or maybe people that have come to this program in the past know that we usually have like a lunch, right? However, we are doing the lunch afterwards. So we're doing the lunch after the program today. So yeah, that's right. You have to stay and earn it, right? You have to earn that lunch. And so it makes a lot of sense in some ways as well. And we don't have to deal with any of the cleanup issues. And we're thankful for the School of Humanities for letting us use this room. So now kind of on to the top. As staff, faculty, and students, you know, we spend a lot of time doing all the things that we do here on this campus. But sometimes we don't get to dig a little further into learning about the amazing people that work here, faculty and staff. And so this program is really a chance to take a pause, to come over during the noon time, and to hear from one of our staff or faculty that you all have nominated to maybe hear from, as well as our committee has worked on inviting to do a presentation. There's no like prescribed topic. They're not here to present research. They're not here to do those kinds of things. It's really, the speakers are simply asked the question, what matters to you and why? And then they get to chance to talk about it authentically from their perspective and share a little bit about themselves and what drives them and, you know, what's important to them. And so it goes in a lot of different directions. And as I mentioned, if you want to see any of our speakers in the past, please go to our website and take a look. And the hope is with this series that we're trying to just strengthen the bonds of staff and faculty and students that are here to really kind of spend time together and build community through the series. You know, just like any good series, there's usually a spin-off, right? And so we have a couple of spin-offs with the What Matters to Me and Why program. We have a medical school that hosts the What Matters to Me and Why program series as well. So you can take a look at that for those of you that are from the medical school, either here or online. And then we also have an alumni series. So we invite an alumni to come back, and usually it's maybe a recent graduate, and then sometimes that's a little bit more, we get more students coming to that series because they want to know, how did this person get into this tech field, or how did they become so successful, or they're a big name at this or that or the other. So we have an alumni series as well that's offered usually in the evening time at the Alumni Center here on campus. And so look for those announcements that you'll see under the umbrella of What Matters to Me and Why series. And probably the last bit of information that I will share is that, before I hand it off, is that we do take time here, and there's a tradition that we have, and that's we spend 1 minute introducing yourself to your neighbor on either side of you. And so we're going to do that in just a second, but after that 1 minute, Professor Claire Yu from Physics and Astronomy will come up, and she will do the biography introduction for our esteemed speaker here today. So with that, we're going to give you 1 minute only to just invite your neighbor and introduce yourself to your neighbor. So go ahead and proceed.
All right, so my name's Claire Yu, and as Ramin mentioned, I'm on the faculty in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Dean Williamson. Ian Williamson became Dean of the Paul Merage School of Business here at UCI this year. His appointment began in January, and I don't think he came on campus until the summer, so he's still sort of a UCI newbie. He received his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then served on the faculties of numerous universities, including Rutgers and Maryland, but also internationally. He served on the faculties of universities in Australia, Switzerland, Indonesia, and most recently he comes to us from New Zealand, where he was the Pro Vice Chancellor and the Dean of the Wellington School of Business and Government at Victoria University of Wellington. So he is a globally recognized expert in the area of human resource management. His research examines the impact of talent pipelines on organizational and community outcomes. In particular, his research focuses on how human and societal capital influences firm operational and financial outcomes, talent management in the context of new ventures and growth-oriented firms, the role of resource practices in driving firm innovation, and the impact of societal issues on firm outcomes. So he's worked with executives in companies and organizations in over 20 countries across 6 continents, helping those organizations in the areas of strategic human resource management, managing organizational innovation, employee recruitment and retention, which is a real key issue these days, and executive coaching for organizations that such as Accenture and others. His research has been published in several leading academic journals, and he's served on the editorial boards of a number of journals, and he's won several awards for his research. I won't mention them all, but I will mention that he was inducted into the PhD Project Hall of Fame for his efforts to enhance diversity in academia and the business world. He is also a recipient of the AOM Best Practices Mentoring Award for his role as the founding president of the Management Faculty of Color Association. And not only is he an acclaimed researcher, but he's also a passionate educator, and he has won numerous teaching awards at those universities that I mentioned. So I think we're in for a real special treat today, and it's certainly my pleasure to welcome Dean Williamson, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, Professor Yu. Thank you very much for this opportunity. As was stated, I started this job in January, but I was in New Zealand. And I worked in New Zealand as the dean of a business school in California for 6.5 months. And at some point, I did actually wonder, was this a real thing? Because I came here to interview the first week of March in 2020. And so I only saw like a glimpse of the campus, and of course, we all know the world changed slightly after that. So it is really great to be here. I really appreciate you taking the time to come join me, and to those individuals who are Zooming in, thank you for your time today. So this is an interesting topic, what matters to me and why, because you can go in any direction. As was stated, I've spent most of my academic career focusing on areas around human resource management. And so maybe I'll start there. How did I get into that? Why does that matter to me? What is the pathway that led to that? So maybe I'll go back a little bit. I'm from Chicago originally, South Side, very proud South Side Chicagoan. And when I graduated from high school, that was a good accomplishment. And in my yearbook, they asked us, what are the things you like to accomplish in life? You guys have that in your yearbook? Do you remember that? And I remember very vividly, I thought about that, and I said, well, what would be a good thing? And so I had 3 things I said I wanted to accomplish. Get a job, because that was, that wasn't a given. So I was like, get a job. I'll be ahead of most people I know. Getting married, that'd be a good one. And I ran track in high school, and it was to win an Olympic gold medal. All right, so put that down. Fast forward. I go to university. I'm at Miami University of Ohio, and I'm in my junior year. And that year, I had a decent track career up until that point. It's Division I school. I was traveling. I was winning some races, and then I had an injury. And I couldn't run for about 2 or 3 months and, had to recover. And it dawned on me, I was like, well, that third goal, scratch that. That's not happening. So the job and getting married, and I wasn't dating anybody at the time. I was like, okay, that's not looking good. So I better get a job. And then it dawned on me, and I was like, wait, how do you get a job? I had actually never really thought about that, right? I was like, I got into college. That's great. I mean, I'm ahead of the game. And then it dawned on me that I had less time in college coming forward than I did in the past. And no one had ever sat down and actually talked to me about what to do. And panic hit me. I was like, oh, wait a second. I got to get a job, or I got to get married. One or the other got to happen. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who was interviewing for an internship at a company. And he said, oh, I got to get this job. I got to get the job. I'm like, oh, man, what's the news? Tell me, why is this so important? And he says, it's a great company, and they do these great things. And I was like, oh, okay, so have you ever worked there before? And he was like, no. And I said, do you know someone who's worked there before? He was like, no. He's like, do you know a lot of what they do? He was like, no. And I'm like, so why do you want to work there? He's like, it just seems like a cool place. And I remember that moment because I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I was like, you want to move to a place you've never lived before, to do something you've never done with a group of individuals you've never met, and you're completely committed. And that's what getting a job is about? And that struck me. And that at that moment, that is when I became an academic. Because I just thought that was the craziest thing. And I thought, I was like, that's a really big decision to make with no information. How in the world are you doing that? And so that curiosity, and I happened to have a really good professor who, in all fairness, I was joking with him after class, a management professor, Wesley King, Dr. Wesley King. And after class, I was mentioning to him my dilemma of not being able to find a job. And I was like, I got to find a job. He was like, yeah, I can understand. I was like, you know what? I should do your job. I was like, your job looks easy. I was young and kind of dumb at the time. I said, and I did say this to him, unfortunately. He reminds me every time we speak. I said, yeah, your job looks easy. He was one of the professors that was a cool professor. He would wear like the Hawaiian print shirts to class, never dress up, come in, crack some jokes, take a test. And then, I was like, you get to work, you get the summers off. How hard could it really be? And he said to me, if you're really serious about learning what I do, why don't you come to my office and we'll talk about it? And he challenged me. And I'm a pretty competitive person. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to be outdone. I'm coming to your office. And of course, I did come. And he talked to me about this thing called research and all these other things that I had no idea about. And of course, I was embarrassed because I clearly had no idea what I was talking about. And I mentioned to him, I actually had a research question. And my question was, how do you get a job? Like, all my friends are talking about what they're doing, and it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense to me. And he says, well, you should study that. And in fact, my first research project that I ever did was with Dr. Wesley King, and we looked at how individuals prepared for and performed in interviews, which is very timely if you were a senior in college trying to figure out how to get a job. And that has basically stuck with me all my professional life, that one experience of my friend talking about how he was going to work at this cool company that he knew nothing about. And, later on, I did get a job. I ended up running a whole bunch of retail outlets all across Indiana. It was a great job, a lot of responsibility. And as part of that job, I had to hire a lot of people. And I would do my due diligence, and I would try to, do the best I possibly can. And I took a lot of pride in that because some of the people I was hiring, they weren't not necessarily coming from very rich backgrounds. These jobs were very important to them. They were providing for their family. And unfortunately, in some cases, it just didn't work out. And even more unfortunately, in some cases, I had to fire the person. And, there is nothing more challenging than having to fire a person you hired. In my mind, that's 100% on you. That's not on them. You picked them, right? And I remember thinking, I was like, man, I did everything I possibly could, I thought, to get this right. And I got it wrong, and really wrong. Like, this is going to impact my organization. It's going to be traumatic to that family. You know, the person having to go home and tell their kids they lost their job. How do you do this? And that stuck with me. And so after a while, I went back to get my PhD, and I got to my North Carolina, and I had 2 questions. How do you get a job, and how do you select people? And that was what I wanted to focus on. And for the most part, you know, that's pretty much been what I've done. And that was sort of what got me into this. And it started off with some very simple questions, and then it became a little more complex, and then it became a little, well, what type of job, what type of person, what do you want that person to do, what industry? And of course, you know, you can always add on to the question. But I never really changed questions. I've kind of always focused. And then I began to really think harder about this question. And I said, well, really, this is an example of us having to make decisions without perfect information. Turns out there was a lot of examples like that. Turns out there's a lot of people at a university who are interested in that, not all of them in management. So the economists are interested in that. The marketers are interested in that. Bounded rationality is something that is common across a whole host of disciplines. So it allowed me to collaborate and interact with people and, you know, talk to people all around the world around this issue, around how we as people navigate those situations. And so these 2 really simple questions that came out of a very simple observation of a 19-year-old kid trying to figure out how he could make sure he didn't have to go back to his parents' house has really produced a situation for me which, you know, I feel very blessed. I've been able to travel around the world. Turns out that these are 2 really good questions to ask because they're questions that are relevant everywhere. Everybody in the world is trying to get a job, and every company in the world is trying to figure out how to find good people. And as I got better and better at answering these questions, turns out other people were interested in speaking with me. And so, you know, for me, looking back at that kid who wrote in his yearbook, you know, get married, get a job, and win a gold medal, never in my wildest imaginations that this journey would have ever included me providing services and working with executives and boards of these organizations globally. And so I feel really blessed. And I'm very clear that that happened because I had access to a world-class education. Because I think everybody has a question. Everybody, in fact, I actually believe everybody's uniquely gifted to ask or think about a question in a very particular way. That's their blessing, that's their gift. Not everybody gets the opportunity to get the skills to answer the question. And for me, being able to go to Miami University, I had a scholarship, that was how I was able to go. And then later being able to be admitted into the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that was the blessing that gave me the skills to actually use this gift, to ask this particular question. And so as an educator, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is how do we increase access to education? Every kid I meet has a question. Not every kid I meet is going to get the tools to answer that question, and that's where we need to step in. How do we reduce that barrier? So for the first 10 years of my career, my work was really thinking about this. And I worked with banks and luxury good organizations and airlines, and it was always about these things. Or I worked with individuals, and I did studies on students and how does it vary based on culture or gender, religion, you know, a whole host of ways of doing this. And this was fantastic. And, you know, I did those things and published those things, and it was great. Then I had an interesting experience which began to kind of change the lens that I had on how I thought about this. So it was mentioned that I, for years, taught at a university in Switzerland. And that was an interesting program because I would take the students to different parts of the world, and we would work in intense periods, usually 2 weeks, around a particular project to give them skill sets about executing the concepts we discussed. So in 2009, I took a group of about 40 executives from Switzerland and Germany to Cape Town, South Africa. And the goal of the project was, what would it look like for us to enter into this market? And there's a lot of reasons why you would want to enter into that market. It's a very robust market, underserved, great location in terms of having access to sub-Saharan Africa, which is a growing market. And so we spent 2 weeks thinking about ways to enter that market and what were some of the HR, people management related issues. Right up my alley. And we'd set up meetings to talk to various different companies across the region about how they had entered into the market, different foreign as well as local companies. And after about 2 days of interviewing with these individuals, it dawned on me, or at least it was revealed to me by one of the people we were interviewing. They said, you're asking us a set of questions, but I don't think you're asking the right set of questions. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because we were asking questions like, well, how did you make decisions about how much to pay them? Or how did you set up your jobs? Or how did you go about recruiting? Very standard HR type stuff. And I said, well, what question would you suggest we ask you? They said, well, ask me what was the most important HR decision I had to make at first. And I said, well, what was it? And they said, well, we had all these ideas, but in fact, the most important decision we had to make was, what is our HIV/AIDS policy? And this was a financial institution. This was not a healthcare entity. And then it dawned on me that we had been completely missing the big picture. So at that time in South Africa, roughly 20% of the population was infected with HIV/AIDS. You can't even get your head around what that means. Like, that is just cataclysmic. And, we started digging a little deeper in that, and it was impacting every aspect of every organization you come across. So we would typically think about, well, let's develop a succession plan to train leaders, and we're going to develop our future leaders in the organization, and we're going to work with them for the next 5 years and give them skill sets. Okay, if 20% of the population has HIV/AIDS, you don't have 5 years. Every single person either knows someone or is caring for someone that is impacted by this horrific disease. And, I really started to think about that, because I said so much of my time has been thinking about how can I help organizations get their unfair share of talent, give them great HR practices about how they can select people so they can get people into their organization. But in this particular situation, I thought, you know what, no matter how good I am, no matter how great the advice I give this company, it's not going to solve this problem, because this problem isn't a company problem. And it really made me appreciate how organizations are truly embedded in society, and that the issues that are going on in society will always be far more important than anything that's going on in your organization. In fact, that's the constraint. And, I think I kind of knew that before, but it was really an important moment for me to reflect upon that in that particular moment. And then I had some other experiences which really highlighted that to me. And over time, I had developed this perspective of a talent pipeline approach, right? Where most of the times when a company was calling me to ask for my assistance, the issue was they had a problem with their talent pipeline. And it's not that complicated. It's a very simple metaphor, right? If you think about it, if you want to have a successful organization, you need good people coming in, right? That's usually when you recruit or you attract them. You probably want to develop them so they can do exactly what you need. And then once they're developed, you probably want to utilize them, right? And we can think about, training. And then, of course, right now the big story is the Great Resignation, and that's basically the opposite of utilization. Like, you can't keep them. And so normally in one of those areas, there was a problem, and my job was to try to help fix it or research on it. But when I reflected on it, I said, well, if you go around the world, even if you go around Orange County, and you think about a community that's struggling, that's having some difficulties, the same story is true. Why is it struggling? Well, nobody wants to live there. So nobody's moving there. The people that are there, we can call them undeveloped or underdeveloped, right? How do we measure that? Typically, we talk about access to education as a measure of how developed is the workforce in a particular location. And the people that are there, that are skilled, what are the things that you notice? They're trying to leave. In fact, I've been to many communities where I talk to parents and they're like, help my kid get out, right? And of course, I've also worked with communities that are developing repatriation programs to try to get people who are skilled to come back. And so it really dawned on me that this issue of a talent pipeline is equally relevant at an organization as it is at a community. And the challenges, the leaks that cause problems are oftentimes social issues, broader things. And for better or for worse, certainly we've seen all of these over the last 2 years. And all of them have had huge impact on the well-being of a community and any organization that happen to be in that community. So issues around access to healthcare, access to education, social unrest, discrimination, demographic shifts, all these things ultimately are the playing field that we all live in. And, it really solidified for me the leaky talent pipeline is ultimately going to lead to negative outcomes at the organizational level and the community level. And then I had to really think differently about what the next phase of my career was going to be about. So the question changed. It was no longer how do people get jobs or how do companies select people. It really became a little bit bigger around, wait a second, how do we actually shape the pipeline of a community? And I came across an article a few years after my experience in South Africa. So this is 2011. And I happened to be reading a newspaper, and I came across this quote, and it just stuck with me. And I reflect back to it over and over again ever since then. And this is from Anne-Marie Slaughter, former Director of Policy and Planning for the United States Department of State, also a Princeton professor. And the note was simply that if you look at the big issues, the top problems that are on the U.S. Secretary of State and President's list, and of course, this is 10 years ago, and it's kind of eerie that all of them are equally relevant today. Extremism, climate change, global pandemics, these are not issues that can be solved by governments alone, because it involves individual behavior on the ground, and who's on the ground were foundations. But also, I thought it was really telling that she pointed out corporations. And, I thought that's right? That's very clear. It's not only is the case that the companies are impacted by whatever social issue is going on, the companies are part of that social issue. They're either part of the problem or they're part of the solution, but very rarely are they innocent bystanders. Very rarely does that happen. And I happen to be someone who works in a business school, which means I am shaping the people who run those organizations. And so I take that. Every business school is proud when it has an alum that does something great, we promote it. And then if somebody does something not so great, we don't promote that. And we all know that there are examples of corporations that have done things that are great and examples of corporations that haven't done great, and all those leaders went to some school somewhere, right? We just don't want it to be our school. I don't want it to be my school. And so I had to change my question. And so my question now is, how can business schools play a role in reshaping the talent pipelines of communities? And I firmly believe that universities, more so than any other entity in society, has an opportunity to shape this. And it's not just because of how we train our students. Yes, that's an important part of it. But it's also about how we shape the broader environment, either where our students are coming from or also where our students are going. And I think this is something that is quite important, never been more important. And if we hold organizations, companies accountable for their role in shaping these things, certainly we as leaders in business schools, we're equally accountable. We have equally as much opportunity to have really positive outcomes on that or not. So this became a focus of mine, and I began doing work around this and with various different communities. So working with indigenous communities in Australia to understand how we can shape the talent pipeline in those communities. So we developed a very extensive program working with indigenous entrepreneurs to help develop indigenous businesses that led to employment, that led to wealth generation, that improves a whole host of outcomes. The work I was doing in Indonesia was the same, working with entrepreneurs in Indonesia to create organizations that would alleviate poverty, create services, generate wealth as well. And most recently, when I was in New Zealand, we had a similar program that we were doing around this, specifically thinking about information technology. And I'll give you a little context for that particular program around how I began to think differently about the role of a business school, my role as an academic, really. So this is my former home on a beautiful day, Wellington. It is a spectacular, we call ourselves the coolest little capital on the planet. It's about 400,000 people, so about the same size as Irvine, much smaller space, right on the ocean. And if you look in the far outreaches where you see like the mountains, right before the mountains is a valley, that's Hutt Valley. Hutt Valley used to be one of the biggest manufacturing centers in New Zealand. They manufactured cars, appliances, as you can imagine, a lot of high-paying jobs. New Zealand is a very expensive place. So when I came to California, everybody was like, oh, you got to be prepared for the sticker shock. Everything's going to be really expensive. And I got here and I was like, I was shocked at the sticker. I was like, wow, everything's really cheaper. I was like, please. And because it's a high cost of living environment in New Zealand. And when you lose high paying jobs, because all those manufacturing facilities are closed, all of them are going, you would imagine in most communities, this would be just devastating. But fortunately for Wellington, at the same time that happened, Wellington became the IT capital of New Zealand, so information technology. Many of you, if you like movies, have seen this company's called Weta Digital, their work. If you watch Lord of the Rings, King Kong, Avengers, anything in the last 20 years that has computer animation, look at the credits. Those animations were done by a company called Weta Digital, based in Wellington, New Zealand, founded by a guy named Peter Jackson, one of the most successful digital animation companies on the planet. And they hire a lot of people. That industry has been growing dramatically over the last few years. It is a huge contributor to the economy. It is the largest concentration of IT companies in New Zealand. And it's one of the region's largest employers. So right at the time we lost the manufacturing jobs, we got the IT jobs. They're high paying and they're far more environmentally friendly. So it's a great trade-off. There's a problem, however. They don't have enough people in New Zealand in general. Everybody jokes there's more sheep than people. There are. And we haven't figured out a way to teach the sheep how to program. So we need more people quickly. And everybody, of course, needs more people in this particular space. Southern California needs more people. This is a global phenomenon that has big issues. And so I looked at this and I said, wow, you know, this is the difference between this community being successful or not. We're the largest university in that area. We're a business school. We train people on this stuff. What could we do to ensure that Wellington's able to maintain this outcome? My students who are working really hard have great jobs. These companies have access to talent. What could we do? And, you know, I had to be really honest. Universities are great at teaching things. We do that better than anybody else. We're not always so great at knowing exactly what to teach, if we're really honest with ourselves. Companies are really good at understanding what they need. Turns out they're not really good at teaching people. Most companies would rather never do that. They'd rather just hire a person ready to go. Governments love people who are educated and companies who pay taxes. That's pretty much how it works. They're not really good at teaching or running a company, but they can provide funding. And so we had a conversation, and it led to an interesting thing. Now, I'll give you a little more context as to why this was so important. So this is a chart around New Zealand, the age of New Zealand. And on the left, you have 1981, and on the right, you have 2013. What does this mean? It basically means New Zealand is getting old, right? And it's getting old rapidly. So right now, 20% of the population is under 15, 15% of the population is over 65. In about 5 to 10 years, there's going to be more people over 65 than under 15, which is kind of amazing. To put this into context, drive around your neighborhood, and I want you to count within like a mile area of your home how many facilities are designed for people under the age of 18. Think about like parks and schools and playgrounds and all these other things. Think about how many facilities are designed for people over the age of 65. And what you see is like, we're not set up for this. Like, this is not how we were designed. And we've never had to think about this because, you know, go back 50 years, we didn't make it to 65. And so now we have, luckily, I'm trying to make it way past 65, right? But we got to think differently about it. Now, unfortunately, that population demographic doesn't necessarily lend itself to the IT workforce that you're thinking about in most cases. Not that people can't get retooled, but, you know, I have a 12-year-old son. He looks at me like I am an information technology idiot, right? He's like, Dad, you just stop. Just let me do it, right? Frustration all over his face. And so I go, okay, this is a problem. Now, there is an opportunity here. The Maori population is the indigenous population in New Zealand. It's about 17% of the population. But, and it's young. It's very young. It looks very different than the rest of the population. 6% of the Maori population is over 65. 33% is under the age of 15. So this is the future of New Zealand, very clearly. However, currently only 2.5% of the IT workforce comes from the Maori community, and less than 1% of all Maori are studying anything in the area of information technology. That's not good. That's not going to help anybody. And so we had to think about, we have an aging population and we have a young population that's not in this area. What can we do? And working with the government, working with other universities, working with community colleges, working with the industry, we actually created a spinoff. We didn't trust ourselves. We said, we're going to create our own spinoff graduate school that's governed by the industry, focused on ICT with the design and purpose of creating a new workforce for these organizations. Really focusing on adults, right? Because we got to get the people right now. And thinking about individuals who have no experience in this space but are professionals and people who are in underrepresented groups. We had a set of master's programs that we designed. And this really worked. We did this for about 4 years. The students were fantastic. The placement rate was almost perfect. The industry was very happy. And it was really interesting example how we as a business school could really shape the pipeline. But it wasn't just us, right? We were working with industry. We were working very closely with government. We were working with other providers. And I was really proud about, this is a good example of how we can really think differently about our role in addressing broader issues. So why do I share that example to you? What does that mean for me? I'm here. I'm not there anymore. I'm in Orange County. So when I arrived, I said, well, I don't know. I never lived in California before. Like, I'll be honest with you. After 2 weeks of sunlight, and I was like, it's like this every day, really? Like, I thought that was a joke. I thought that was just like something they tell you in the commercial. So this is a brand new thing for me. And I said, well, who are these people? Where am I going? And so I pulled up the data because I am a researcher. And this is the data. So this is the age projections for Orange County. And when I first saw that, I was like, wait a second, this looks really familiar. Where have I seen this before? And I was like, oh, wait, this looks a lot like New Zealand. It's getting older quickly. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And of course, this is the flip side of getting older. So this is the projections for the kids who are going to go through K through 12. Big decline. So remember I said, drive around your neighborhood and think about all the facilities that are designed for people under the age of 18. What if we have less people under the age of 18? What are we going to do with those facilities? Like we saw schools being closed and converted into condos in New Zealand. Like it was like they had no purpose for those things. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So then I looked at the demographics in terms of ethnicity. And of course, we all know this is happening, but the Latinx population is the youngest population in Orange County, and it's growing because it's young. I was like, oh, okay, that sounds familiar. And then I looked at, well, that's great. They can go to college. This is the workforce that's going to drive Orange County into the future. And then you look at eligibility to go to a UC or a Cal State University. And you see that the Latino population, the African American population, by far the lowest, and also the Native American. So I was like, wait a second. That's not a recipe for success. And so I began to think, well, wait, we as a business school can actually play a role here. This is the question that I'm really interested in. One other piece of information. What are the jobs that are really driving the success of Orange County and California? They're the technology jobs. That's where everybody's trying to be. This is some data on the representation across demographic groups in technology jobs nationally. So you have percentage of population in the US, high-tech professionals, and executives. And the numbers are unacceptable in my mind, right? Because you have a disparity of representation in, communities that are fastest growing communities in terms of the population of the country. And so you go, okay, wait a second. We have something we need to do here. And one other point that I'll bring out, that one of the reasons why people want to get into this is because the technology companies are great generators of jobs and wealth for communities. One of the ways these companies get founded is they get founded and then they get money to support them, venture capital money. So here's some statistics for California. California has the largest venture capital pool of any state in the United States. So if you have a business and an idea, it's good to be in California. But if you look at who gets the money, so we know for Black-founded firms, 0.6% of them have received VC funding in California, or 0.6% of the VC funding, and they're about 5% of the population, and the numbers are even more dramatic for the Latinx companies. About 1.2% of the VC funding in California goes to them, yet they represent about 39% of the broader population. So I look at this and I say, listen, there's an opportunity here for us, a business school, to lead. This is the question I'm passionate about. This is about increasing access. This is really about changing the talent pipeline. And for our business school, what I've been working with them around is we have for years been known as the business school that is designed to be the place that develops leaders who are really skilled at this intersection between technology and business. And it's a fantastic positioning. It's what attracted me here. That was the thing that caught my eye. And we're in Orange County, and you couldn't have a better idea. But if we're going to be the place that develops leaders for the digitally driven world, we also have to be, by definition, a place that really excels in inclusive excellence, to ensure that all communities are able to actually be successful in this space, because that's the talent pipeline problem that the community needs us to solve. And as a researcher, I think it's a great question for me to be thinking about. As a dean, as an educator, I think it's a space where we can have a really major impact. And this is the thing that I'm excited about working with everyone here around, and really excited about the opportunities that our business school can have to shape that space. So I'll wrap it up there. That's what's important to me and why. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that really fascinating talk, and I think we all really enjoyed it. We're going to open things up for questions, and I'm going to take my prerogative and ask you, I could ask you a couple of questions. One would be, you mentioned the Great Resignation and the fact that so many companies and industries are having a shortage of workers now after COVID. Do you have comments on that, and how do we fix it? And
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I just published an article that came out last week about this. And so one of the things to appreciate is that this pattern of the resignation is not new. So if you look at the data, we've been seeing increasing resignations for the last 10 years. I think what's probably happened this year is that a lot of people who would have quit last year just stayed. And now they're like, okay, I can't take it anymore. I'm out. And so we got 2 years worth of resignations in one. But the pattern has been very clear. And there's a few structural things around it which I think are driving it. One is we're a service economy, right? We're not a manufacturing economy, really, and we're not an agricultural economy. If you're a service economy, it's based on generalizable skills. So, the startup, I was able to do what I do from New Zealand because all I really needed was a laptop and Zoom. The skill set is generalizable. And that's true whether we're talking about being a dean, whether we're talking about being a waitress or a waiter. These are service skills, and so they're generalizable and they transport easily to different organizations. It's also never been easier for me to find out about a job. So, some of us are old enough to remember that on Sunday, you look at the newspaper to find out what was available. Now, on Sunday, somebody that you don't know emails you 5 jobs, right? Not to mention whatever you're getting inundated with on social media. And now we can take a new job and actually not move because we can work virtually. So the cost of switching jobs has never been lower. And the way I think about it, there's this phrase called the war for talent and how companies have to fight for talent. And I've kind of just said, listen, the war for talent's over. Talent won. And the companies are now having to come to terms with the fact that they really have to come up with different propositions as to why a person would want to commit their time and energy and their passion to whatever you're doing as an organization. And I think this is a very big structural shift, and I don't actually think it's going to change back. So that's a little bit of my thoughts on that.
Thank you.
There's a question here.
Did your friend from college get the job at the company?
So we both applied. He did. I did not. I was very disappointed by that. Although I will say, I didn't get the job. I did the interview, and I had a recruiter who called me up afterwards and said, listen, I like you. I'm going to give you some feedback as to why you didn't get the job. And I really appreciated that. I remember that very vividly because, I wouldn't have never known I would not have had the confidence to call the recruiter to say, can you give me some feedback? And he took the time to kind of help develop me as a person. And I was like, well, you know what? I will always try to do that for somebody if I get a chance. But, I got another job. It was okay. It worked out.
I think there's.
Thank you, Dean, for coming today. My question is, education is a business, as this is an institution of business, and how important is it for this pipeline to work from within? From my experience here, there's very little in terms of professional development that allows people to promote within when you've learned a new skill. And so when offers come from other places, providing new opportunities, we tend to see a lot of people leave because, like you said, they're tired and they're fed up. I can't take this anymore because I'm not seeing anything that's really investing in me as much as I've invested in the institution. How do we fix that?
Well, I mean, we're not immune to the Great Resignation, certainly. I just think we individuals who are responsible for the organization have to always be thinking, why would a person want to commit their time and energy? What do they get out of it? I actually think it's okay for me to go to somebody and say, why are you showing up every day? What do you want to get out of this? Now, I think most people, when their boss comes to them and says that, they're thinking, oh, there's a right answer. Let me guess what the right answer is, right? That's a setup question. And I actually don't feel like it's a setup question because, there's no right reason for why a person does a great job. Everybody's got their motivation. My job as a leader is to try to understand that, and can I create an environment that allows you to do that? For some people, they need money to provide for their family. For some people, they want to learn new things. For some people, they like spending time with certain individuals. I mean, there's no predetermined best reason. My job is to try to say, how can I get that for you so that you're in doing what you're doing? And that requires, by definition, flexibility. And one of the things that I think universities, like every employer, is going to have to think about is how we become more flexible in the way we think about the way we manage work. Because as people have choices, they're going to want to get things that are specifically good for them. And that means the university is going to have to be more flexible. So if that means we invest in your development or give you a chance to work on different projects or whatever you think is useful, as long as we can tie that back to the mission of the organization, so be it. Universities are places where people come because they like working here because they get developed. Just intellectually, you're around things. So there's always going to be a natural curiosity. So that's okay. I mean, I don't think we should ever shy away from that. We're not in the business of capturing people. That's not what a good university does.
All right.
Hi, thank you. So I really appreciate that one slide that had the breakdown of the leadership and by ethnicity. I was wondering if you have or were looking into further breaking those down into male versus female, especially within leadership and IT and everything like that.
Yeah, so as your question might allude to, the numbers are probably not that good. If you would identify yourself as female. Right, in the sense that the skewness becomes even more so, particularly at the senior levels, women IT executives, particularly women IT executives of color, very, very few. And I'll just tell you why I think that's really important, right? Because it's not just about access to jobs and the wealth and the employment that it provides for the community. All of us in our life could not manage our life without some form of technology. And those companies that are generating it, they play a huge role in our life, whether we like it or not. But if they don't have people from our communities, whatever community you identify with, who are helping them think about how to use that technology for a service or a product, you're not going to get what you need. The community isn't going to get a service that's helpful, and many communities just will not get served. And so I think there's a really important, not just economic, but broader social issue around that. And that's true whether we're talking about social media or whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or data analytics, that those viewpoints are really critical to ensure that we use the tool in a way that actually is most beneficial to the most people. And there's no way that's going to happen with that type of representation that I showed you before.
I had another question. I
Yeah.
was just wondering, can you talk a little bit about your upbringing in Chicago, a little bit about what family you came from, and your brothers, sisters, so forth?
So I'm the oldest of 6 boys. My mother is a saint. I don't know how she handled us because we were horrible. My mother and father both grew up in Chicago. My mother was a Chicago public school teacher for 30 plus years. So not only is she dealing with us, she would go deal with those kids every day and then come home and deal with us. My father started off working at Illinois Bell and then later on worked for a financial institution. So they were always encouraging me to get educated. That was just going to be what I did. I'm not really certain they understand what I do today at all. That certainly wasn't in the cards. But it was always like, you should do it. I should give a little bit of a joke. So when I decided to quit my high-paying corporate job, I was doing really well. I was making a lot of money, more than my dad. And I told him I'm quitting to go back to school. He was like, "You're doing what?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go get a PhD." He was like, "Man, what are you talking about?" And he set me down. He says, "This is a bad idea." I said, "No, it's a good idea." He said, "So I want you to figure out how bad of an idea this is." And he made me calculate how much money I was giving up. He said, "You know all this stuff about time value of money and all this stuff. You're going to calculate that right now." And he made me come up with a number, actually. And he said, "You still want to do this? You're giving up all this money." And I was like, "Dad, you just told me how much my freedom is worth. I'm worth it." And I was like, "I guarantee you, I'll get it back." And I really appreciated him doing that because, sometimes you can have these big ideas, but you don't appreciate every idea comes with a cost. And, he was like, "I'm not saying you shouldn't bet on yourself, but you should really appreciate what you're betting on." And I was like, you know what? That was a good thing because I was really focused in about like, this was really important to me. It wasn't just, I should say too, I quit my job to start my doctoral program. A week after I quit my job, I asked my girlfriend to marry me. And she said yes. So something's crazy with her because normally you would like to have a person who has a job. And so we moved to North Carolina. She found a job there. I was a student. And we made it work. So I had a lot of support growing up. But it was an interesting environment. South side of Chicago is the south side of Chicago. You got the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So you did accomplish your second goal. Of
I
getting married.
did. I did get the second goal. I married the girl from down the street. She grew up a block away from me.
And
Will,
how many kids
do we have
have?
Do we have any online questions?
No. He's,
Okay, we'll keep. We
I have 3 kids.
You have 3 kids.
Twin daughters who are 18. They're freshmen in college. And I have a 12-year-old son who's here with me now.
Fantastic.
We have a question over here.
Hi there. Thank you for that. I thought it was interesting that at the beginning of your talk, you said that everyone has a question, and it's just a question of giving them the skills to answer that question. But in my life, often the people I admire are the ones who know what question to ask and ask a novel, really interesting question. And I think your whole talk actually was an illustration of how you were able to ask really good questions. So if there's a question here, it would be, how do you teach someone to ask a good question?
I mean, I firmly believe this, that each of us has a unique experience and is a unique capability. I don't know what that is but I think each of us has a lens. And for me, while everybody in my particular circle at that time was going around doing something, for whatever reason, I had the ability to kind of step back and see that, be in it, but not also be of it. And I think that's when you can ask the greatest questions, right? When you can understand a phenomenon, but you're not so captured by it that you can't be objective about it. So for me to be saying I need to get a job, but also this process is crazy at the same time, allowed me a window to kind of say, well, what are the ways to do this? And I think all of us, in some way, shape, or form, have that space. But not all of us are given the time or the resources or the tools or the training to kind of hone that vision or that point of view. So I just happen to have a bunch of things that showed up in my life. I had a professor who didn't say that's a stupid question, who said, that's actually a great question. Why don't you focus on that? Who encouraged me. And I had some resources in terms of so I was a URAP student, right? That program gave me the first introduction to research. I didn't know what that was. So that's what I kind of mean, how we as a university, we help people, if you like, polish them off and allow them to kind of use whatever talent they have around that. I firmly believe that. I think that's what I've seen with the students I've had the privilege of working with.
We're out of time now, but again, I'd like to thank Dean Williamson for a marvelous talk, and let's thank him. And
Thank you very much.